Neighbor, everybody needs good neighbors. Just a friendly wave each morning helps to make a better day.
It's a cracking tune, isn't it? It's one which I think virtually everybody in the world is familiar with. The soap Neighbour started in 1985. That's 35 years this year, and it achieved in the UK itself peak popularity with 21 million people tuning in to watch a story about a bunch of neighbours in a little street called Ramsay Street in Erinsborough, which is supposed to be a suburb of Victoria in Australia. There's a lot of truth, isn't there, in that song? Everybody loves good neighbours with a little understanding when a neighbour becomes a good friend. But to us in the church, being a neighbour means more than that. And this is exemplified by the story of the Good Samaritan, which we're going to read now. This is in Luke 10, and it starts at verse 25. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him, Jesus, to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And he answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbour as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbour? Jesus replied, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell amongst robbers. They stripped him, and they beat him, and they departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came up to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him, bound up his wounds, poured on oil and wine. Then he set him on his very own animal, and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii, and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Which of these 3 then, do you think, proved to be a neighbour to the man who fell amongst the robbers? He said, The one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, You go and do likewise. This is, of course, a famous story about compassion on strangers. Kenneth R. Bailey, in his recommended book, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, points out that in this story, the scribe who came to Jesus knew very well the law. What he was seeking in testing Jesus was actually something that precisely told him who would be his neighbour. Bailey says, Who is my neighbour, he asked. To be justified is to be saved, and to be saved is to inherit eternal life. As a good first century Jew, he expected Jesus to respond with a list which the lawyer hoped he could manage. The neighbour would naturally include fellow Jews who keep the law in a precise, God-fearing fashion. Gentiles are not neighbours, and everybody knows that God hates the Samaritans. So they certainly do not qualify as neighbours to a first century Jew. After all, he read Leviticus 19:18, which said, You shall not take vengeance or bear any grudge against the sons of your own people, but love your neighbour as yourself. He would conclude that his neighbour was limited to the sons of his own people. Such a reading would easily become inaccurate, because it also included strangers who sojourn in your country. But this scribe was looking for a shopping list a shopping list that would define who he would show mercy and compassion to. In the story, the priest was returning home from Jerusalem to Jericho, where many of the priests lived. Of course, they lived quite a life of luxury because they were a hierarchy and a hereditary one at that. So he probably wasn't even walking. He was riding. Yet he didn't want to be defiled by going anywhere near a person who he could not clearly identify because he was unconscious and stripped, so he couldn't tell by accent or clothing what nationality he was. Obviously, Gentiles were beyond the pale, and he could have even been one of the hated Samaritans. So the priest chose to go by on the other side of the road. It was then followed by the Levite, because the Levite served in the temple as well, but they were a lesser class, and he too was probably returning to Jericho down the 27 kilometers of this very dangerous road. But he saw that the man might defile him again, and also passed by on the far side of the road. It was too risky to be unclean. That way get in the way of serving in the way that we're supposed to serve, because the narrow requirements were not met. The narrow requirements being they had to be sure of their own sanctity first. And then came the Samaritan. And of course, he's the complete opposite in this story, because that's what Jesus was challenging in this tale. But he was actually the most racially opposed person to the Jews in this. The last person who would expect to show mercy to anybody who was Jewish would be a Samaritan. But we can't tell in this tale whether the victim was actually Jewish. We just assume that he was. But the Samaritan stopped and did all these things. This would have been the very last thing that the scribe who was asking the question was actually hoping to hear from Jesus. And then Jesus challenged him. Which one of those then became a neighbour? And it was the one who showed mercy and compassion, which was the Samaritan. In fact, he went well beyond the bounds of anything else. This is completely the opposite of what he would have expected. So Jesus here is turning the whole question of neighbours on its head, from a narrow definition way back in the Old Testament to anybody who came along. It wasn't who they were or what they were. It was the fact that they were in distress is what Jesus was pointing at. And that therefore brings us the question, are all our neighbours actually living around us? Should we actually treat everybody as a neighbour? Or do we too have a narrow, self-defined list? In this story, Jesus uses a chance encounter of one person with another person on the road to actually overturn centuries of understanding and set a new precedent. So I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to tell you a little story, and the relevance of this will come towards the end of this little talk. At Westlands in about 2002, might have been 2001, there was an engineer who flew out to America. One of our helicopters was in California, and they were doing some hot and high trials in the mountains there to establish how well the helicopter performed. He flew out completely on his own into the very, very busy LAX airport, which is at Los Angeles. It was very, very crowded. He made his way to a baggage carousel and got his bags off, and then proceeded to try and find the gate where a smaller aircraft that he was going to get up country and then fly up to the north of California was leaving. So he had to find his way to that gate. As he went through the crowds, he noticed a very young girl struggling on an almost empty carousel with two massive bags. She was only about 5 foot tall and clearly only a teenager and very petite, but the bags were massive. He walked past and thought, have I got time to? And he decided that he would go and help her. So he went over, struggled with these huge bags and pulled them off the carousel. Fortunately, they had the wheels on them, and the rest of them went round the other side of the carousel, got the second one and brought it back to the young girl, who nobody had set out to help. Everybody was so busy going about their own business. So he dragged them over to she was absolutely over the moon, gushing almost or whatever. He was quite embarrassed, or whatever, because he was in his 40s and she was so much younger. And she said, "You don't know who I am, do you?" And he thought, that's an odd question. So he looked at her and he said, "No, I don't know who you are." And she said, "I'm Kylie." Now, I know we've just had Neighbours, but it was the very same Kylie Minogue who's become a nation's sweetheart. This was 2002, when she'd had a #1 hit in over 40 countries the year before. "Oh," he said, embarrassed, the only man in Christendom who didn't recognise Kylie Minogue, because of course he was not expecting to see anybody he recognised in this place. "Oh," she said, "you've been so kind," and she gave him a hug, really embarrassed at this stage. "What are you doing here?" he said. "Oh," she said, "I've just come over for a party." It was actually an Oscars after party that she's attending. "Right, excellent, thank you." And off she went. He was so made up, he didn't know what to do, really. He needed to tell somebody this good news, so off he went to the queue for the aircraft he was going up country on, got into the queue and standing in the line. Of course, he knows nobody. He shuffled and shuffled towards the front and was talking to himself. Well, who would have thought it? Of all the places in all the world, who could you meet? Could be anybody, but no. Amazing who you can meet here, or whatever like that. And he just said to nobody in particular, because he had to say it, "I've just met Kylie Minogue." Looked over his shoulder, smiling at the bloke behind him, being now full of self-importance, and the bloke went, "Really?" in a deep voice. It was Lionel Richie, the American musical superstar. And our friend wasn't expecting him either. Now, it's an odd story, but I'll explain to you at the end what I really think about that one. But let's move on now and ask, who are my neighbours? So I thought I'd come outside because from here I thought I might be able to see my neighbours. Back in the square mile, one of the sets of questions were asked were about our neighbours. And it said, "Which of the following best describes you?" I see too much of my neighbours. My neighbours are just like family. My neighbours are there when I need them. I hardly see my neighbours. I wish I lived somewhere else. Not a great set of questions, really, when you're talking about your neighbours. So I thought I'd come out in the garden where maybe I can see my neighbours. Let's have a look and see. Right. How about over here? So over this fence then, I have my next door neighbour, a young couple, both medical professionals with very young children stuck at home in the middle of all this lockdown. I know their surnames, I know their first names, I know their children's names. The children hardly ever talk to me, even whenever they see me over the fence, and I can't really talk to them easily because I'm so much older than them. How do I best show love to them? Chucking the ball back? It's great to hear the sounds of children enjoying themselves. Fixing the fence when it needs fixing. Reminding them about the trees overhanging. None of these things really show love other than general concern. How about at the end of the garden then? Well, we have a couple here who moved from a fairly well-to-do lifestyle in Surrey, down here to Somerset, and are very artistic. They're older than we are. I know their first names, I know their surname, and I know they're involved in village life, but other than that, I don't really know a lot about them. And I certainly don't spend a lot of time talking to them. How about over the other way? Well, that's my very next door neighbour, Vivian. She lost her husband a while ago. He was a lovely man. He was interested in aircraft things like I am, which was good. And now she's on her own, even though she's got grown-up children. And indeed, her son had COVID-19, and he was a senior anaesthetist. But he survived. And we are reasonably close. And we do things for her. And we take the dog even for walks occasionally, which is not really an Armstrong thing. So we really do try and show love to Vivian. But there's so much more we could probably do for her. And down at the front of the house, down the side here, at the far fence, you can just see. I don't even know the people who live there. I know that there's a light on in a room late at night with somebody watching television. I know that there's carers who come to the house and, well, go in and out and then leave. This is Alan's yard. Alan runs a small garage business. It's right at the bottom of my garden. I know Alan and I know his partner. Both of them working very hard, doing a very good service on cars and keeping a lot of people's very old cars, including mine, on the road. They're great blokes. They're great blokes. They're kind to us. We're kind to them. We give them the odd card. I give them the odd drink of wine occasionally as a thank you for something they've done. But I've never really shared anything about what we believe in Jesus with them. Kindness, yes. Compassion, practical help, yes, we have. They've helped us, but we've not been able to do too much for them. Maybe it's time in lockdown to find some way of talking about Jesus here. And here are other neighbours facing some serious medical difficulties. Educational professionals, retired, kind people, done a lot to help people in all their lives. How can I help? The answer is on the prayer mat. The answer is by talking, asking, and being clear that actually we want to help in any way we can. And it seems just now that prayer is the thing that's working. And here, in lockdown, when you go for a walk at night, you actually see people to talk to, and they say hello. There's a chance to get to know people we've never met before. Who would have thought that being confined to barracks would allow you to actually get out? And because the streets are, well, empty, people feel they have to talk to each other rather than just use the busyness of a crowded street to go past. And as a result, you meet new people who might want to find out something. I wondered if you could see that. I'm actually sitting in my workplace. It's unusual. It's empty. There's normally about 40 people in this office. And usually it's very busy. You see, these people too are my neighbours. Several years ago in the church, we did an exercise with a book called The Square Mile. I wonder if you can see that, by Chris and Miriam Kandaya. And it was about how to reach those within the square mile of the church, your workplace, your neighbourhood. Because you see, these people in this office too are my neighbours. In that exercise, we actually considered some questions. How would you describe your attitude to work? I work because I have to. I work to pay the bills. I work because I love it. I work because God has called me to do it. Do I work for my neighbours in any of these respects? Not entirely sure. Or do I see myself as a pastor for my work colleagues? Do I see myself as a missionary for God in my workplace? Is there something I can do to be more effective in sharing Jesus with my neighbours? I wonder how much you actually know about your neighbours in the workplace. I say there's about 40 people working here. I'm just going to show you a little bit around the office. How do we care for the people in the office? How do we share Jesus with them? There's some obvious things. You can keep a Bible and a Gideon's Testament on your desk. You can try and sit closer to people, but sometimes there's spaces. But look at all these desks. Most of the people I work with don't even know who are the people working this side of the office, at best by Christian names. And you see, if they don't fit your personal list of people you like to actually befriend, well, it's very easy in the business of work not to. I mean, take the guy in the corner. He's been at this firm for 40 odd years, but he's a bit his own man. He's a bit truculent. He's just does what he does. He doesn't like to share with people. He doesn't really talk to people. So how do we deal with him? Well, we say good morning to him. We say, how are you? We say, when's your birthday? Would you like to bring some cakes into the office? How do we deal with the guy in the corner? He's a young bloke, very principled. He's probably a vegan. He's certainly close to it as such. He looks at the world and he sees all kinds of things wrong with it. Well, we talk to him. We engage with him. We ask him what he thinks about things. And we explain what we think about things and why. Which is because we see it through the eyes of Jesus. What about the young ladies who work in this section here? New out of university. The world is shiny, except they've got £53,000 of student debt behind them. And they come into a situation when there's people in this office who are almost 64 years old. Their granddads are not actually that age, some of them. Certainly not their parents. How do we share with them? How do we reach a position where we can actually share Jesus? Well, we talk to them. We talk to them. When people say things in the office, when people use the Lord's name in a way we'd rather not hear it, as in John 11, verse 35, where Jesus wept, we point out to them that actually they're quoting the Bible. Whenever they say, oh, it's raining today, it rains on the good and the bad, we tell them where that actually comes from, because most people don't know. And then you have conversations where they say, how do you know these things? And you say, it's all in the Bible. It's not really in the Bible, just a lot of religious stuff. Well, it is. And when you've got a Bible, you can perhaps show them. How do we deal with the guys who are actually making the management decisions in the big offices at the end? In my case, they're much younger than me. Doesn't mean to say that they're not very capable, more capable than I will perhaps ever be. But actually, we need to say to them, I can't make this meeting on a Wednesday at lunchtime because I go to the Westland Christian Union, where a bunch of about 8 of us actually meet and pray for those on the site, where we discuss what's going on in our various sections and we share our worries. But actually, we sit and we try and bless the place, bless this company. That's our role. That's being a neighbour, to have compassion and understanding on what things are happening around us. And outside the window, there's an awful lot more people. There's something like 2,800 people on this site. As you can see, there's quite a lot of it, from the buildings where things are manufactured, through to the human resources, through to the big offices and the shiny cars where decisions are made. They all should be in our prayers. They all should be in our thoughts. Is there something we can actually do for people? Not just share and talk to them, but physically. Jesus washed people's feet. He washed the feet of those closest to him. How about making a cup of tea for the person who comes in the office, who doesn't know anybody? How about offering to make the cups of tea in the office while you're here? How about offering to make copies of files and printouts for meetings that people need, so they're not having to constantly run against time pressure to the machine? It's about, well, just serving people. They're neighbours. Loving your neighbours can just be doing the simple things. And that includes talking to them. You don't look too good today. Are you having a rough time? Is there anything you'd like to talk about? And then explaining to them that maybe actually there is somebody who stands above, beyond and in control of all this. Because you will get those opportunities. People come in the office here and they go, well, if you want to talk to the religious one, it's Brian. But I don't consider myself religious at all. I tell them I'm not really religious. I am very keen on Jesus, because knowing him and dealing with these people as he would deal with them, as the Samaritan indeed dealt with the man who had been waylaid by the robbers, is being a good neighbour. So, as I close then, I need to stress that our families are our neighbours too. Sharing Jesus with those close to us really has got to include our families, particularly those in our immediate families. And let's be honest, this lockdown has pushed us all into a greater proximity than, well, maybe we're used to, perhaps more than some of us actually wish. For each of us enjoying the children at home, or dad and mum working from home and offering the chance for family lunches, there will be people who are missing going to work and being in that different social environment, and people missing not having the house to themselves to get on with all the stuff that needs to be done, rather than have everybody under our feet all day. There are the children of young people whose plans for exams, university, their future, or just celebrating finishing primary school with their friends they've always had and been with, are now thrown into a complete melting pot with little obvious way ahead. There's a lot of fear about, but today I say perfect love casts out all fear. Take courage, my heart. Stay steadfast, my soul. He's in the waiting. Hold on to your hope, and your triumph will unfold. He's never failing. Oh, and the Kylie story? Well, an unexpected encounter between a global superstar and a simple man because of a simple act of kindness. It would never have happened had my colleague simply just walked on by like everybody else was doing. Nothing to see here, moving on. But he stopped to be neighbourly. And his day became something else, unexpected, something altogether different. He couldn't even keep it to himself, and he ended up telling another global superstar all about it. An unforgettable day for him. I suspect that in God's great plan, there are so many simple encounters with people who do not know him, or have turned from him, or are desperate to know him. Those opportunities for a simple act, or deed, or word are probably all around us daily in this time of lockdown. We're exchanging words or meeting people who we may well walk past daily. What if the conversation we have, or the kind thing that we do today, is the introduction God has planned for them to the biggest superstar of all? What if, whether we find out or not, it's the opening of a door to someone's heart, which Jesus will now step through? Maybe when somebody's life book is opened in heaven, the day you or I did some little thing for somebody else will be written in gilt letters as their unforgettable day. I came to know Jesus because I moved into a semi-detached house from a terraced street. Oh, the luxury of it. And the people in the other half of it were Christians. They let me watch TV, play records with their son. We both played guitars late into the night. They fed us toast and jam, always curiously toasted, just on one side and then smothered with jam on the other. They took me to Crusaders, what we now call urban saints. They listened to my tales of a broken teenage heart. Oh, and they took me on holidays to the Keswick Convention. They just did it. I was one of a good few like that. John Ray and Andy Cottrell really were good neighbours. I need to do so much more to truly be that kind of good neighbour. Finally, Jesus has chosen here the most provocative example of love and selfishness he could do, to illustrate the depths of love he expects us all to reach. And in doing this, he chose the Samaritan as the neighbour to a stricken, probably Jewish victim. The Lion Handbook of the Bible says the Samaritans were considered scum and untouchables. It was as provocative a racial statement as Jesus could have made in those times. And in this week, when sadly we are seeing in America terrible injustice, a lack of humanity, and once again the sin of racism, we see it causing the death of a man arrested on suspicion of using a fake $20 note. Jesus calls us to put aside all judgment and division, to love and serve our neighbours regardless of enmity, antagonism, race or circumstance. And he does this by calling us to love our neighbours as ourselves. Let's be compassionate to each other. Let's be understanding and merciful. Let's be practical, helping where we can. Let's be good neighbours to everybody. There's this wonderful Barry Maguire song which you hear playing in the background. It's based on 1 Corinthians 13, which says in one of the verses, "Where love lives, there is no fear. Now can you hear? Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, with all thy strength, and love thy neighbour as thyself." He does not ask us to do this alone, but we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. Let's be a good neighbour today.